Hello everybody, welcome to the Boxing Science Podcast. This is episode 41, where I'm going to be answering your questions on a range of different subjects regarding sports science, strength and conditioning, and training advice in boxing and combat sports. If you're not subscribed to the channel yet, hit the subscribe button so don't miss out on any future content. In this episode, I'm going to be covering how to train on fight week, heavyweight conditioning, whether punch power is down to genetics or is a trainable aspect, comparing conditioning protocols, whether to be running on the treadmill, the track, or on the hill. So I've got a question from the one Dallas. Is punching power more genetic or trainable ability? Can you train an athlete to be a power puncher, or are you born with it? A lot of people think that people are either born a puncher or they're not. And there's an element of truth to that. Strength and conditioning can improve the physical contributors towards a punching action and help athletes punch harder. But you're not going to get an athlete comes in and they're not a knockout artist and then suddenly start knocking out people in the ring. It doesn't happen like that. Being able to punch hard is dependent on a range of genetic qualities such as fast twitch muscle fibers, stiffness through the tendons. Their lever length is really important as well. Trainable qualities, technique and timing, their boxing style, and just their ability to set up the shot as well. That doesn't mean that strength and conditioning doesn't help you punch harder. It does, because it helps improve the physical qualities that transfers to it. So ground reaction force through the foot complex, lower body impulse, really important, and rotational strength and power, and hand speed are all trainable qualities that can transfer into somebody punching harder. So if you're somebody that is thinking about starting strength and conditioning, maybe not be a believer in it, it helps improve you as an athlete, helps you be able to punch harder, but it's not going to be a magic trick that just makes knockout artists. Athletes on the program feedback to us saying that they feel like they're punching harder, they feel stronger, they feel more durable, and that is the most achievable kind of response that you're going to get. You're not going to just become a knockout artist, and I never can kind of sit down an athlete and say, I'm going to make you get more knockouts. No, I'm going to help them become the best athlete that they can possibly be. US dollar 2023. What are the best type of conditioning for a heavyweight boxer for mid-spar fatigue? Then it's put muscle, so thinking about that kind of muscular endurance. Heavyweights carry a lot of muscle. So when they put in high forces, high speed actions and start punching in bursts, because they have this large amounts of muscle, this can spike in muscular acidosis and feel like the real increase in lactic acid. This is why heavyweights seem to like kind of punch themselves out, or maybe like kind of box at low intensity. So with their conditioning, it's all about increasing the intensity, making sure that they are controlling that muscular acidosis, but also have the ability to go to them really high lactate levels and be able to, one, recognize it, two, work at it, and three, being able to recover and go again. This is why we do a lot of 30-second max out sprints, 20-second clusters on the air bike, doing our repeated sprint protocol, working on muscle buffering capacity to be able to control that muscular acidosis. A lot of the conditioning that we do is off feet. Because they are heavy, most heavyweights are over 100 kilos. If they're going to be doing running, they're going to be exposing themselves to high impact forces, which can increase the likelihood of injury, the lower body or the lower back. Because they are carrying this weight, they're unable to reach the maximum intensity levels that they need to be able to push their body to the limit to create physical adaptation, create more intensity off feet, whether that's through circuits or doing an air bike, than they would do if they're running. They're quite limited to their running speed to overload that intensity to optimize physical adaptation. We're getting safer exercise and a more effective exercise when we do off-feet conditioning. Mostly this is on the air bike, so you'll have seen our videos that we do with Fabio Wardley, where we're pushing him to the max on the air bike. And we can also do HIIT circuits and power endurance circuits on this as well. Got a question from Brandon McKee. Why shouldn't boxers bench press? So it's not a totally banned exercise at boxing science, but it's something that we manipulate to work around the limitations of the boxer's upper limb. Boxing is a very repetitive sport, very anterior dominant, and they throw thousands of punches every single session. You know, we worked out the other day that a boxer punched over 5,000 punches in just one session. They become very anterior dominant. This affects the amount of range that they can produce in a bench press position without this internal rotation of the humeral head and putting a lot of pressure on the shoulder joint here. Also, lack of wrist stability and strength, and also elbow stability and strength can end up increasing the forces going through elbow and the wrist, and you can end up getting injured this way. We like to do bench press in a racked position, starting from a dead start and predominantly working on that concentric action, but working to that partial range where you're not getting this compromised position of the shoulder. We also like to do dumbbells because there's a lot of imbalances between boxers' left and right side. The lead hand is used a lot more than the backhand. We've worked this out to be a 3-to-1 ratio, or maybe even a 4 or 5-to-1 ratio if you count combinations using the lead hand as a jab or even as a rangefinder for feints as well. This lead hand is getting used a lot more, so it ends up being a bit tighter and sometimes a little bit stronger as well. It might get a little bit imbalanced when working on barbell exercises, and you start to compensate using different muscles in your back to try and get the weight up and to keep the bar balanced. So we use dumbbells to work on unilateral differences, and we'll do a floor press, we'll do dumbbell chest press with bands, a dumbbell chest press from a hip thrust position, and a range of different exercises because using the dumbbells to make sure that it's shoulder friendly. Where we'll do bench press, I'll probably do it on lighter loads, maybe with accommodating resistance, so doing a banded press, or doing a bench press throw where we are working towards them full ranges and not getting into a really compromised position at that end point because it's doing it a lot lighter and the more emphasis is on the concentric action and the throw. So they're the reasons why we wouldn't use a bench press so much in boxing, and also here's some alternatives on how we'd still strengthen that horizontal pressing action. So another question from Brandon: how much heavier should you be compared to your fight weight? This depends on whether you're a professional or an amateur fighter. Professionals have day before weigh-ins. They have single competitions where they prepare for anywhere between 6 and 12 weeks, whereas amateurs on same day weigh-ins, and they could have about on a week's notice, or maybe it's sometimes on a couple of days' notice. Amateurs need to stay a lot closer to the weight. We suggest that they don't go anything above 5% above their competition weight, but try and keep it as close to the weight as possible, around about 3%, because this is going to be a safe weight cut. You know, you'll be able to manipulate glycogen, calories in a short amount of time to try and get that weight down to your competition weight if you're called up on a short notice. So it's around about 3% or maybe even on the weight for amateur boxers, because they don't have that time to do a proper weight cut and also be able to refuel and get into the ring safely and also for optimal performance. For professional fighters, it's a bit different. They can be a little bit heavier, but they're still given targets at what percentage that they need to be away from their weight, depending on how many weeks they are from competition. So as we get closer to the fight, they're given a smaller percentage than they are away from the fight. We suggest that boxers don't go above 12% of their fighting weight. A lot of boxers end up being about 15%. We've even had boxers before that are above 20%. This is a very intensive and excessive weight cut. The camp is just basically just to try and make weight. This isn't optimal for performance. Anything between 12 and 15% is something that we can deal with at Boxing Science. It's still in that category where we're looking more towards making weight rather than trying to optimize performance. In an ideal setting, athletes shouldn't go above 10%. Getting 10% above the body weight means that the athlete is more fueled all the way through training camp to optimize the performance in the S&C setting, but most importantly, in the boxing setting, especially in their sparring. As they get close to the fight, this percentage targets. Now, I'm not going to say this on this podcast here, just because this is individualized due to how they respond to acute weight making strategies. If you're going through this, you should have a nutritionist that can help you define these targets as well. If you're wanting to find out more, go and check out Lee Rickards at boxingscience_nutrition on Instagram, and also check out the Q&A sessions that are really good on the YouTube channel. Question from Pete Ozzy Jr. What is the best way to utilize the reverse engineering process in amateur boxing? If the main goal is the bout, what testing/training would you do towards this journey? Yeah, reverse engineering the process is really important because we're thinking, what do we want as the end goal for the athlete? In amateur boxing, this is quite difficult to do because the bout can come at any time. So I've just mentioned there about weight making strategies. An athlete could be given a week's notice or even a couple of days' notice before competing. What I would say is to plan out your training to try and peak for a certain competition. So I'll be looking at national finals, whatever you are, whether you're a novice athlete or you're working towards an elite competition. This is where your peak relies on. So this is a reverse engineering the process. We want to achieve our peak strength, speed and fitness right before that competition to give ourselves the best opportunity to win the most important bouts of the year. Then I'd be looking to reverse engineer from that. How many weeks do I want tapering? How many weeks are we going to be working on strength and speed and also working on maximum strength? What I would suggest for you to do is to go and check out our recent video, how to plan an amateur boxing season, and also look out for our new program coming out very soon, the Youth Athlete Edition of the Train Like Champion. Tristan Naidu, hopefully I've said that right, has said, why shouldn't we do any intense exercise on fight week? Does it affect our water loading process? In terms of intense training, we wanted to taper off competition. So we wanted to limit the amount of fatigue that we're getting from the training to make sure that we're optimizing that adaptations and that freshness going into competition. Conditioning, we finish conditioning around about 10 days out in terms of intense conditioning, red zone conditioning. We'll probably do a recovery run or a tempo run on the Monday or the Wednesday before competition on the Saturday. We then look to do taper sessions that are just looking to fire up that neuromuscular system, working on like stuff like banded shadow box, plyometrics, punch specific exercises, looking at mobility, particularly rotational mobility, and also working on rotational power as well. This is used to maintain and unlock some speed adaptations going into the fight. It's interesting what you say about affecting the water loading process. This is really important because a lot of boxers, when they do the conditioning, especially if they're water loading, will end up increasing their sweat rate response. This will really affect like the amount of water loading lost through urine output because you're drinking, you're sweating more, less is going through urine. So with water loading, you're wanting to try and not sweat as much. So you're optimizing that process of flushing out water out your system, predominantly through urine. So this is why you don't want to do too intense exercises where you're sweating more, because this will affect how your body holds onto water whilst doing water loading. If you want to find out more about water loading, go and give Lee Rickards a message at boxingscience_nutrition on Instagram. I've got a question from Liam Daly. What are your thoughts on using resistance bands for punching speed? So we use resistance bands predominantly around the lower body to fire up that lower body during a punch specific action. So we use it in a range of different ways through our banded shadow boxing to try and unlock that speed and power from the lower body to transfer through to upper body action. But I think what Liam's trying to ask here is using resistance bands for punching speed, so predominantly upper body. So when you get the band around the back and trying to punch, we use bands a lot in strength conditioning to try and increase acceleration and that drive through that sticking point, increase the force towards the end range of the lift, will transfer into more forceful actions during a punch and a snap at the end range of the punch. However, I wouldn't advise boxers to do this during shadow boxing. The reason why is that this is a very, very specific scenario where you're looking to try and optimize punching speed and your technique. When you use the bands, it helps increase that drive through that sticking point because you're wanting to try and activate the triceps during that mid-range. So when you're doing it during a punching style, really what you want to be doing is nice and forceful from this section, relaxing and then snapping at the end range of the punch. If you are putting bands on top of that whilst you're punching, you're almost like pushing rather than whipping through because you're having to tense through to work against that resistance band to make sure that you're increasing that speed towards the end range of the punch. In a strength conditioning setting, it's really good, but in a boxing setting, you're really messing with your technique there. You're pushing the shots rather than kind of whipping the shots through and snapping at the end range. We're more looking to do like shadow boxing with dumbbells because you're still getting that whip and you're looking at working your technique and holding that end range position. Whereas like with resistance bands, you're looking to try and push through that action. And I'll be looking predominantly to do resistance bands around the knees or around the hips to fire up that lower body during punch-specific action. So I've got a question from Bomber Wells. If your fight gets pushed back a few weeks, do you stay in the second phase of the conditioning program for longer? Bomber Wells, I think, is on one of our conditioning programs, whether that's the HIIT for boxing or MMA or the Ultimate Fitness for boxing. A few little plugs there. Go and check out these programs in the link in the description. But let's talk about this from a generic point of view, because this is a problem that we kind of see in boxing, whether it's amateur boxing or professional boxing. A very chaotic schedule. Bouts get called off on a day's notice, and then you're given a fight like in a few weeks' time. And it's very hard to manage that training load period because you've tapered down, and then you don't want to pick yourself back up again too soon, because that spike in training load can end up causing illness, fatigue, injury, and that will obviously affect the training process and also your performance on fight night. So what you want to do is assess the situation. How many weeks have you got? If you've just got 1 week, then you're probably just going to repeat the taper phase. This is something that was just done with Terry Harper, where a fight got cancelled on the day and then she boxed a week later. Give her a little bit of something to make sure that her fitness level's topped up, because you don't want to be doing 2 taper weeks on the trot. You end up like kind of losing some strength, speed and fitness over if your taper is too long. But then if you've got an athlete that has got 2 or 3 weeks, you just want to be careful of that spike in training load. Try and manage it to anywhere between 20 and 30%. Normally we don't want spikes over 20%, but we're quite open-minded in terms of like, if an athlete has tapered down, they're going to have a big spike in training load. Just manage your recovery in between sessions to make sure you don't start overreaching. Then you look to try and increase the load again before starting to taper off. If you're on that conditioning program, more or less do the same things. Just manage the loads and intensities to make sure you're not having that big spike in training load. Mostly if you've got a very, very short window, just keep working on the same things, because if you start switching it up, you need a certain amount of weeks working on a certain adaptation to achieve physical adaptations. So you might as well prolong that same training stimulus, but just manipulate the volumes and intensities on that to make sure that you maintain them fitness levels, increasing them fitness levels, whilst avoiding any kind of overreaching. Question from James Anderson, another person that's on our conditioning programs. As an amateur with no official fight dates, and you always need to be ready, how would you plan your conditioning? For example, if I have the 10-week conditioning plan of yours, would you just keep cycling it or go about it differently? Yeah, you can keep cycling it and keep working on like the same fitness stimulus, same session types, but when a boxer is in the program at Boxing Science, they repeat the same program, but they do different manipulations of like the intensities. So for example, if they're doing 30-second maximal sprints, on the next camp, they might be doing cluster sprints instead, doing 20 seconds on, 20 seconds off, 20 seconds on again. For the muscle buffering, instead of doing 2 minutes on, 3 minutes off, might be doing something like our muscle buffering pyramids, the gears workout that we do where people are working towards a higher intensity. They cycle through the same target adaptations, but the session type changes to try and keep progressing our athletes. In this case, don't know which 10-week conditioning program you're on. You might be on the Train Like Champion conditioning program, the HIIT program, or the Ultimate Fitness for boxing. Try out one of them other programs, whatever you're on, try a different program. They still work on the same adaptations, but they've got a different session type to make sure that you're shocking your body, making sure you're optimizing the adaptations. Nathan Taylor has asked, how do you perfect the snap in the punch? I always feel like I'm pushing the heavy bag with the punches rather than snapping. So there's a range of different ways that you can do it. You can do it from a strength and conditioning perspective. You can also do it from a boxing perspective too. Let's start with strength and conditioning, working on generic exercises such as core training, isometric training, whether that's doing an isometric floor press or working lower body with the isometric hip thrust or the split stance trap bar lifts. This isometric tension can transfer into isometric tension that's needed upon impact of a punch. You can also do punch-specific exercises, whether that's holding the punches against the wall, going for a backhand or a jab, but you can also do boxing-specific ones where you work through bent arm shots such as the hooks and uppercuts. This is a fantastic tool to use in strength conditioning, but also a warm-up tool before your training or during competition. Let's work on specific now in terms of like your boxing training. With a heavy bag, have a look at the size gloves that you use. So if you're using a big size gloves, let's say 16 or 18 ounce gloves, you're more likely to push against the heavy bag because you're not feeling that snap effect when coming into impact with the heavy bag. Lighter gloves, 12 ounce, maybe even 10 ounce gloves, your body will have to react and create that stiffening effect to help protect the hands and wrists. You won't be able to punch as hard, but you'll have to snap at that end range to help protect that upper limb. Approach this with caution, but I think that this is a good way, especially on the heavy bag, to feel like you're snapping at the end range rather than pushing the heavy bag. And maybe like look to try and do some drills such as like blows rather than looking at trying to do a 3-minute round where you're just trying to increase that heart rate, trying to work on fitness adaptations, just going at it in the bag. Doing blows, like kind of coming back, doing a jab, doing that 10 times, doing a jab cross, doing that combination 10 times. This is something that we do at Sheffield City ABC, where we're working on them combinations, looking at performing these drills with optimal technique, but also with optimal power. And I find that this improves that connection with the bag, potentially looking at lighter gloves, but also working on blows and working on the technique of the shot rather than just going at it on the heavy bag. Okay, so I've got a long message here from Austin, running personal training from Sydney in Australia, which we're going to be visiting very soon. And originally from the UK, same town as Fabio Wardley. And he's asked what are the best way for fighters to get their weight down, finding many run and starve themselves on a poor diet and no running background. Secondly, track versus hills versus gym in terms of conditioning priority for fighters. So that's probably a better question for me to answer. In terms of like getting the weight down, it's very, very basic. Don't go too heavy. Look to try and hit steady weight targets per week. Looking at resting metabolic rate, getting some body composition analysis as well to make sure that you've got a diet that's bespoke to you. Making sure that you're fueling for the right sessions and making sure that you're hitting a certain calorie deficit depending on how much weight that you need to lose. Good rule of thumb is around about 300 calorie deficit. Some that are looking for excessive weight cut will be looking for a 500 calorie weight deficit. Got any nutrition questions? Fire them over on Instagram to Lee Rickards at boxingscience_nutrition. So let's work on to the other question, track versus hill versus gym, working on a treadmill. Which one do I prefer to condition fighters? For me, I prefer to do it in the gym, on the curved treadmill, on the motorized treadmill. The reason why is because we can control the intensity at a certain speed to try and optimize the adaptations that we're targeting. Whether that's 30-second max out sprints, whether that's our repeated sprint protocols, or when we're looking to optimize red zone adaptations. We can manipulate the volumes and intensities accurately, optimize physical adaptations. Also on the curved treadmill, the rubber slats and the curved nature of the treadmill helps reduce impact forces, which is really important when our boxers are performing such high intensities and also large training loads to try and reduce the likelihood of soreness and the likelihood of injury. Hill sprints can be quite beneficial because the incline can help reduce impact forces whilst doing sprint activity. I would do like a repeated sprint protocol such as like 12 seconds on, 48 seconds off, depends how big the hill is and how quickly you can get down. That'd probably be the second option to perform our sprint training protocols. And then you've got track running. I think that it can be a good conditioning tool because it's very easy to set out targets in terms of distance and time. You can try and manipulate this volume and intensity, working 400, 800, or even 1200 meter. But with track running, what you've got to be careful of is the impact forces that boxers may experience, and also the suboptimal running mechanics due to movement limitations, and also how often they've trained their running mechanics as well. So this will limit the kind of amount of reps that you do. So rather than doing like really high levels of fatigue, I'll be looking to just try and optimize a very intense period. So for 800 meters, which is about 2.5 minutes for most boxers, I'll be doing like 4 or 5 repetitions on that. I won't be doing like any more, where he's pushing them to a level of fatigue where basically the running rhythm, the running mechanics are altered, and this can increase compensatory patterns and can increase that likelihood of soreness or injury. Also, doing like sprints, so like doing stuff like 100 or 200 meters, could become quite problematic can increase that hamstring activation, which can push an athlete over the edge, again, increasing the likeliness of soreness and injury. So I'll be looking to 400, 800 or 1200 meters, but keeping the volume quite low to optimize the adaptation, but also reduce any kind of after effects that you might get from track running. Okay guys, so that's the end of this week's episode of the Boxing Science Podcast. Thank you very much for watching or listening. Whatever platform that you're on, hit the subscribe button, give us a rating to help grow this podcast. Hopefully see you on the next episode of the Boxing Science Podcast.